it is Dawn here, and we're going to talk today about presence to polarity. We're going to talk about how that is imperative if we are going to walk in the way of wholeness. Walking in the way of wholeness is the second of the 7 core teachings on the Radical Redefinition of Relationship that I received from Yeshua in terms of walking this path of sacred partnership and what does that really mean. And there's a lot of, for those who aren't on the path, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it is and somehow thinking that it is simply related to a relationship with another individual. And in fact, that is secondary. The primary is always about that sacred union within us. And so walking in the way of wholeness is like the prerequisite to this path in a lot of ways, and certainly to the radiant realization of sacred union with another. This is the primary path, and so I hope that makes sense. So today we're going to talk a little bit about this presence to polarity, and this is really, I've mentioned this again and again, this is really like central in the teachings of Jesus, of Yeshua, and yet the church, my background is Christianity and in terms of my religious affiliation, and so and I have a theology degree from a seminary, and know a little something about how things are presented in that particular realm, although I've been out of it for 20 years now. But I think that one thing that's really important for those of us who do feel called to this path is that the teachings of Jesus or Yeshua, if you resonate with those, but even more broadly, the universal truths that we are able to discern for ourselves once we are on a spiritual path and aligned with our true nature, our true divine self, and are placed in the context of all of creation and of God. Once we're in that flow, we're able to see through what beyond. We're able to see beyond this limited construct that we had placed ourselves in from the beginning, which is, I have a lot to say on that, but I'm going to save that for a different video. So today let's stay focused on this presence to polarity. So in Jesus' teachings, he often, in his parables in particular, but also just in many of the Gnostic manuscripts, you'll find a reference to this in a little more clearly than some of the books or Gospels that are contained in the modern framework of the Bible that were got the stamp of approval to get in, so to speak. But you'll find that in the ancient texts that where there are stories about his teachings, you'll find this constant calling our attention to what appear to be polar opposites, and Jesus elevating the entire conversation to show that all is one and that there is a unification. And so this principle, this core way of looking at the world is integral to a spiritual path, period. But of course, even more so to this path of sacred partnership, which begins always with sacred union within. So the questions that I asked with regard to this teaching when I first received some of this information, my questions were very simple. I was like, well, what are the keys to finding balance in a relationship period, and then in a sacred partnership? If this path is something that my soul chose, then what are the keys to finding my balance? And of course I was brought back to this teaching of sacred union within, and so that's how we want to think of this first, is what are the keys to finding my balance as I come into union, into partnership within me, and then move into the realization of that with another, which for some of us may already have happened, and for some of us may be something that we are working toward in this lifetime, and it may be something that we're able to experience fully. My intention is to hopefully experience that before my time is through on this journey of life. But if not, see, that's the thing that really got reframed in all of this for me, is that if not, I can experience that within myself, and it can be beautiful. It can be truly beautiful. Okay, so what are the keys to finding our balance on this path? And then what makes for the most fulfilling experience of that union within, of that partnership with another, for both participants and within us, for, you know, the more what's attributed to the masculine side of us and or the feminine side of us. And there are lots of ways, by the way, to talk about that. That's the way that's most common, particularly currently in the mainstream. So I'm going to probably use that language, but just consider that there are many ways to look even at those seemingly opposing forces within us, and you know, we can see what we think is outside of our control, the external environment, which of course has to do with our internal. So keep that in mind too. And then that third question that I asked was, you know, how do we determine where to place our focus at what junctures along this path? So I go into more detail in this in the book, Sacred Partnership, 7 Pillars for the Radical Redefinition of Relationship. You can find that online from my website, but you could also, it's free with the online journey, the book download is, so you can find that there. So I want to just focus on a portion of what I talk about in the larger teachings, and that is that, let me just read from something that's in that chapter on walking in the way of wholeness. So this comes from the intro, and it's just me raising the questions, and this is what I received initially in a general sense on this topic of what does it mean to walk in the way of wholeness. And when I say that, that's my phrase, walking in the way of wholeness, for describing this way, the path of Jesus, the transformative path of Jesus in general. So if anybody's watching that years ago, took my transformative path of Jesus, you'll know what I'm talking about there. But the way, Jesus was always saying, you know, the way opens up when we walk within it. In my soul's remembering, that was what I received most from his teachings. And then, so this idea of, you know, stepping onto the path is really important. And walking in the way of wholeness, we can think of that as, you know, just some huge grand thing, but it's actually just about being present. And in this video, we're going to talk specifically to present to polarity, present to what is presenting. Okay, so in this introduction where I was asking these questions before we got into any of his teachings per se, Jesus gave me the following insights, which are in my words, my translation, of course, not his words, but this is, you know, kind of the idea. So let me just share this with you. So when we enter into relationship expecting something, and then feel dejected, depleted, or disregarded in not receiving what we expected or were conditioned to expect, we may well miss the greater joy of fulfilling our purpose simply because we are so consumed with our disappointment. Where's your attention? On your disappointment, or focused on the appointment for which you are truly here? So there was really a revelation here that Jesus was showing me, because I see things visually in addition to the words that I received to write down. And there was this real revelation of, wow, this is an opportunity. Wherever we feel we are experiencing disappointment, it's a redirection to the appointment to which we are called. So to continue on from the book. So where is your attention? On your disappointment, or focused on the appointment for which you are truly here? The place you fix your gaze will determine the potential richness of the reward you will receive from your partnership. So again, there was this idea of the receiving from the partnership can be way more abundant sometimes when we are not so fixated on what we perceive to be the problem that is presenting, but rather we are again walking in that way of wholeness, and we are focused on the appointment to which we have been called, the path itself, I would say, the path to life, the way of wholeness. And so where are we placing our gaze? That's the question. That's the big, trying to kind of hit the high points here to give us context, and then we'll move into the specific teachings of this chapter in the journey. So begin with wholeness and completion, not limitation, deficiency, or need. Start with abundance, gratitude, and blessing, not lack. Continual thing to which I'm called in my own journey, and I don't do this well personally, so don't look to me as a model. However, as Dawn in this life, and yet I know the wisdom of this approach to begin with wholeness and completion, regardless of what you see, regardless of the context of where you find yourself to be, however much of a desert it may appear to be. It reminds me of something I wrote years ago called Desert Wind. I have to find that. It was a poem with 12 movements, and it seemed my life had been a desert, and yet there's always this opportunity to look up and see the stars and feel the love that is here for us in any given moment. So within the context of a relationship with another, or that inner sacred union, again, where are you placing your focus? And the opportunity is always to begin with wholeness and completion, to begin with abundance, so life more abundant, to begin with gratitude, an affirmation of life, and to begin with blessing, and to look for that. And as if we don't see it, then one step, walking in the way of wholeness. Choose that intention again and again and again. Back to this intro leading up to the teaching on the way of sacred wholeness, or the walking in the way of wholeness. So everyone loses in a game where relationships are saddled from the start with the expectation of remedying a perceived lack within. Yet, none of us is perfect. We all come to relationships with wounded hearts and a vulnerability of spirit. Some of us come with dashed dreams or seeming weaknesses in body, mind, or spirit. And here Jesus was showing me all kinds of seeming weaknesses. The things that show up as a physical disability or a physical limitation of some sort that may or may not be obvious to others. He was showing me also, and something I could identify with personally, that more on the mental, emotional realm, and how the deep wounds that we carry from this life, or perhaps a larger soul experience, can affect our perception, our self-perception, and then our perception of the capacity that we have to be in relationship. And because some of us have this limitation that is around the perception of our very capacity. We literally feel so fundamentally flawed that we feel we don't have the capacity. And so he was showing me this and how it shows up: mind, body, spirit. I didn't mention the spiritual aspect. Let me just touch on that, which is, there can be a situation where we, and this is subconscious for some of us, there's a cap in terms of the depth of the spiritual experience of union with all of life, with ourselves, with all that is, and with another, of course. And there's a perceived cap, or a limit to the capacity that we feel we are deserving of experiencing. And so this is another way this limitation will show up. So we all come to these relationships with wounded hearts and a vulnerability of spirit, and then some have these dashed dreams and these more serious limitations, some of which are very, they're hidden to us. And part of this life's journey is about uncovering those and bringing them forward, and so that we can be transformed from the inside out. So how then do we avoid the trap of expecting a partner in life and love to make us whole? We change the way we look at and see ourselves before we enter into commitment with another. This is the true beginning of a whole new way forward in relationship, to see oneself rightly. Now, Jesus was not suggesting that we have no relationships until we're perfect. And so if there's any limitations in my explanation there, I want to make that clear. But there was this seed idea he was showing me here, where we choose to place the primary focus on how we are seeing ourselves. as a soul, and then how we are experiencing, the degree to which we are allowing ourselves to experience life in its fullness. That's where we place the primary focus. And then the second part of that is that as we choose to see ourselves rightly and commit to being willing, it's, that old being willing to be willing, right? Being willing to see ourselves rightly, as we commit to that path, then we begin to open ourselves up to sacred union within, sacred union with another, and that experience. So focusing on the experience rather than we've been conditioned to see relationships as about a very narrow, very, very narrow band of experience, a very tiny part of the spectrum. But we who are called to the path of sacred union within and sacred partnership with another, or with life, I would say also, we who have been called to this path are about experiencing the full spectrum, the 360-degree experience and beyond, right? Because it's radiant expansion from within. It is a fullness that goes beyond our understanding of fullness. And so continually, Jesus was showing me the lotus, rainbow, not a rainbow actually, but more of a spherical rainbow, and then the colors coming out into like this diamond light experience. And that's what we're here for. But it all begins with a commitment to seeing oneself rightly and opening to the fullness of experience. And that has to happen in the moment, from the moment of the now, over and over again. So how can you change the way you are seeing yourself in your life circumstance? How might you begin with appointment, wellness, wholeness, completion, gratitude, blessing, abundance? This is the key to releasing the chains of extremism and beliefs that perpetuate that exist at one pole or the other. Okay, here Jesus was showing me, I began writing a book 20 years ago called Love Between the Poles. I never finished it, but it was about my experience with being labeled and diagnosed as bipolar, which, I know now is only me being very awake, and not being or feeling that I felt that I didn't have the capacity, the strength to hold the center. I actually did, but I self-abandoned. Okay, so this is my experience here. I self-abandoned in that particular aspect of my life because so many people tried to tell me that something was wrong with my perception, with my experience. Kind of that's not the way it works here, Dawn. And what I would say to everyone right now is, welcome to my world. This is how it works, This is it. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, people. Okay, it's a little personal aside, but so when I wrote this book, Love Between the Poles, or started writing the book, this is the very principle I was talking about. I was labeled as bipolar, and I did have experiences of hypomania, and in one instant, essentially a manic break. And I basically lived in hypomania, which is like a mild mania state, for a few years. And then I would have a few either very dramatic short periods of depression, or I would do what is known as rapid cycling. That's how it manifested in my own experience 20 years ago, after this chaos in my life that I knew on a deep soul level was the true commitment to this path that I had already been walking, and I didn't have words for it then, but it was the spiritual path, the path of awakening in general, my soul's choice to be here and fully experience life and life to the full, and to be willing to be opened up, right, to more of that experience. It's always primarily about that willingness. So when I experienced all of this and I wrote this Love Between the Poles, I was talking about these two opposite experiences, what I termed then as blinding light, that was the mania side of things, and sudden dark, that was the depression side of things, and how it would, how for me it was a rapid, for a couple of years, it was like literally being looped around the sun or moon or whatever that was, like shot from one end to the other of the canon, like constantly. And it was the total experience of that polarization in my body, in my mind, in my heart, in my soul, I would say, but most certainly my spirit. And so when I wrote about this, it was funny because, like, at the time, I was pretty angry at Jesus. I loved him, of course, but I was really angry at the perpetuation of an experience I was tired of at a soul level. That's what was really happening. But the way that the box I put it into, let's say, at that point was about I was, either seeing myself as the victim, right, of, being kicked out of a church, or, my job being stripped away from me for, I don't know what reason, I still don't know. But, all these experiences I was having in certain individuals doing things that were just bizarre, like what is happening? And I kind of knew, though, on a soul level, this was like somehow all intentional. And I was very aware of my own particular chosen mirror for that experience, which had to do with a twin flame dynamic. And so as I was experiencing all of this, like this juxtaposition, right, of like the blinding light side of things and then the sudden dark side of things, what I was writing about was that it is love that heals. It is only love. Okay, yes, medication might be helpful in some cases, and I was writing about, yes, all of these other things, therapy, talking, nature, exercising, all of that is great, but it is only love that heals, and it is love that we can come to in our own experience. And I'm sorry, this gets me emotional because I know how that experience was for me, and how I felt a complete and utter abandonment and a lack of love in terms of human. But I also knew that it was ultimately the love within me and my choice to align with that love and to hold fast to that love even when I thought I was in the void, because that void is the birthing place. There's a quote I used to love, I still love it, it's by Nietzsche, from chaos within, is the birth of dancing stars. I'm going to look that up. I might have that quote off a little bit, but it's that one must have chaos within to birth dancing stars. And when I began to choose that narrative and that choice of seeing myself as from within the void, the great creator, who is working within me, within that void, to bring forth the love and to birth that river of love, a river of stars, and to allow me to see again the stars, which took me years, I knew intuitively that it was that the love in the center was the true healing. And so that's what I was, attempting to write about at that point. And again, I never finished the book, but what Jesus has shown me in terms of this, the spiritual path in general, like the path of life itself, and life is an acronym I often use for living in full expression, to come to life and live in full expression, because that's what we're here for, the experience of life. So this love between the poles is where it's at. It is, let me just read again. This is the key to releasing the chains of extremism and beliefs that perpetuate and exist at one pole or the other. And then Jesus said something really fascinating to me. He said, this is not to suggest that you find the middle ground. Love is found neither in an either-or existence or a both and free-for-all. Love bears witness to the insufficiencies of our limited perspective in a world of polarized perspectives. Okay, so whatever your perspective is, and you may think, you are existing at one of those poles in any given moment, or you may feel like you are holding that center. Okay, so let me repeat that. Love bears witness to the insufficiencies of our limited perspective in a world of polarized perspectives. Love places its trust in the sufficiency of the grace of God and God alone. If you don't resonate with the word God, because it's been so freaking corrupted in our experience of this world, then choose to see that as source, creator, all that is, the true nature of the multiverse, which is love. You know, love is God, God is love. This is the true nature of God. And so let me repeat that. Love places its trust in the sufficiency of the grace of God and God alone. Do you see how that might become a barrier when we're on this path of sacred partnership or sacred union within, and we're putting all our focus, right? Where are we putting our focus? On this path, somehow presumed path of perfection and or the attainment of this ideal relationship status or experience, or even the grace and ease and flow of our own life. But Jesus is saying that love, true love in the center of those poles, you know, is not about the middle way that's watering down the two experiences, but neither is it about choosing one or the other and fixing ourselves to what ultimately is a limited personal perspective in a world of polarized perspectives. Jesus is saying that love chooses to place its trust in the sufficiency of the grace of God and God alone. What would our world look like if we began there? What if that really was the key to walking in the way of wholeness in every moment? It was essentially a return to the grace of God and God alone. To finish up this intro, what Jesus gave me in terms of my understanding of it anyway was, when you find rest from the weary argument of which way is right and walk on in the way of wholeness, trusting that the way is always opening up, you are restored to new life. Your life becomes an offering that in time opens the hearts and minds of those inspired by your journey here. Will you keep your focus on the pain of division, or will you see the promise of a pathway to purpose that is experienced along the way? And it's that last part that's really critical here. It's experienced on the way. It's not an attainment. It's not, you know, I love the writing of Apostle Paul when he talks about press on, you know, toward the mark and run the race set before you. I love that imagery, and it's so valuable, and yet it has become so ingrained in our Western, in particular, way of understanding life that we forget that the fulfillment of the promise and the full experience of our lives is something that is found on the way, in the moment of the now. And so Jesus says, will you see the promise of a pathway to purpose that is experienced along the way? Will you use your energy to perpetuate position, or will you embrace the untapped potential of a greater possibility that flows freely as you fix your eyes on all that is everlasting? And so while it is very important to fix our eyes upon the finishing of the race, what Jesus is saying here is it is more important to embrace the untapped potential of a greater possibility that flows freely as we fix our eyes on all that is everlasting, on the grace of God and God alone. Look and see, Jesus says. Look and see. I love that. Look and see. Listen to the invitation of all the divided things. Listen for the invitation of all the divided things. That's the question. What is the invitation? And the invitation is always an invitation into life and the experience of life and the fullness of life. Again, not either or, and surprisingly, not necessarily both and, or this only this middle way. Now, there is value, of course, in the middle way, particularly as it's talked about from the Eastern traditions. So I'm not dismissing that. I'm just offering a different understanding that is about being on the way in the movement and the meaning and the momentum that is life, and listening for the invitation of what appear to be the divided things, which, as we know, it's all held in one light and one life and one love. So look and see, listen to the invitation of all the divided things. Heal the division illuminated by two in opposition. Sometimes this can be experienced as two people. Sometimes it can be experienced as warring voices within us. Sometimes it can be experienced as two political perspectives. Sometimes it can be experienced as two opposing paths or multiple opposing paths. Listen to the invitation of the divided things. Heal the division illuminated by the oppositions, and then leave it behind. Eyes fixed on the invisible and indivisible kingdom that is here and now. Walk on. So that, of course, comes. That's me bringing my my love for that philosophy. And my favorite song, probably all time or right up there, is "Walk On" by U2. I love that. I love that song. And so Jesus is saying we can heal this division that's within us, that's illuminated by these oppositions, whether they be polar opposites, seeming polar opposites, or whether they be, multiple options, sort of that chaotic energy that presents itself in our world and in our own experience of life. So he's inviting us here to fix our eyes on the invisible kingdom, the indivisible kingdom within us that is here and now, and to walk in the way of wholeness. So the invitation here is about finding that balance, which was my initial question. Of course, my initial question was so limited because it was about, how can I find balance on this path to this presumed state of being with another individual or even within myself when I had that awareness. And do you see what he's doing here, what this opportunity is? It's a whole, it's definitely, this word was overused, but it's a paradigm shift, and it's a boom, let's expand this a bit, let's be that exploding star for a moment, and let's take this, to the infinite. And let's see what's really happening here. And it's interesting because since I wrote this back in 2015 or 16, first wrote it down, and I had my journals, from many years, but my feeling about this path has really expanded because I kind of intuitively, felt all along whoa, this was actually the seed point, I think, of my own chaotic feeling states within life. It's here, because I was naturally wired to experience this fullness, and I had either myself, because I chose myself to limit myself or to see myself in that limited capacity and have that perspective about myself, or because I bought into the conditioning that told me not this, no, that's not possible, no, that's not right, that's not how it works here, Dawn. So whatever the source of that was, there was a watering down, a limitation, to the point that I no longer was connected to the reality of who I am, as having the full capacity for being on the way, walking in the way of wholeness, returning to the grace of God and the grace of God alone, beginning with blessing and abundance and gratitude and wholeness and completion, beginning there. So let us begin, and let us begin again, always walking in the way of wholeness.